little fox.
The Light Princess. Chapter 1. We Need a Child. Once upon a time, a king and queen longed for a child. As the years passed, the king tried to be patient. But he was an impatient man.
My queen,
He moaned one day.
we need a child. Other kings have children, lots of children. Why, I know a king with 12 of them.
The queen lifted an eyebrow. 12 children? She patted the king's arm. Our turn will come. Just be patient. The king sighed and went outside. Walking along the palace's lovely lake always made him feel better. Soon their turn came. The queen gave birth to a child.
A beautiful daughter!
The king cried in delight.
We'll name her Ellen.
The new parents began planning the baby's baptism. The king was in charge of sending out invitations. He was in such a hurry, he made a mistake. He forgot to invite his sister, Lady Agnes. This might surprise you, reader. How could the king forget to invite his own sister? Because he tried never to think of her. Agnes was a sour, spiteful woman. In fact, no one liked Agnes, not even her black cat. She had a huge forehead and a face filled with ugly wrinkles. When she was mad, her eyes flashed blue. When she was really mad, they flashed yellow and green. Oh, and Agnes had a dark secret which few people knew. She was a witch, a very wicked witch. The news about Princess Ellen spread through the kingdom.
There will be a special baptism at the palace,
Agnes said.
and I will be invited.
Each day, Agnes checked her mail. Each day, she found the same thing. No invitation. Agnes stomped her foot.
I hope my brother didn't forget about me.
The day of the baptism finally arrived. By now, Agnes's mind was made up.
I'll go to the baptism without an invitation,
She said. She put on her best dress and climbed into a carriage. As she traveled toward the palace, Agnes's eyes flashed yellow and green.
Mark my words. My rude brother will never forget about me again.
The Light Princess. Chapter 2. Her gravity is gone. It was the day of the baptism. The king and queen waited for the guests to arrive. A nanny stood nearby holding the baby.
What a wonderful day.
The king said.
Our friends and family are coming to... Oh, no.
He slapped his forehead.
There's Lady Agnes. I forgot to send her an invitation.
He waved.
Welcome, sister.
Agnes frowned.
You forgot to invite me, but I came anyway.
Her eyes flashed blue.
I would never miss this special day!
The king turned to greet more guests. Agnes looked around for the font. That was where a priest would bless the baby with water. Agnes walked over and stood next to it. Soon everyone gathered around the font. The priest was about to dip a cup into the water.
Now!
Agnes thought. She tossed a potion into the water. Then she spun around 3 times and whispered a spell.
Light of spirit by my charms. Light of body every part. Never hurt human arms. Just crush your parents' heart.
The baby suddenly laughed, and Nanny let out a gasp. She didn't tell anyone that now Ellen felt lighter than air. At first, no one realized something was wrong. But soon after the baptism, there was an odd event. Ellen flew out of Nanny's arms. The tiny baby kicked and laughed as she floated around the room.
Help!
Nanny cried. A servant rushed in and Nanny pointed to the ceiling.
The baby is floating,
she said. The servant ran for a ladder. Nanny climbed up to fetch the baby. Later, it happened again. This time the king was holding the baby.
How odd, my queen.
He frowned.
I can't feel Ellen in my arms. It's as if...
Shoop! The baby floated out of his arms. She laughed and danced in the air.
Help!
The king cried. The servant came running with the ladder. He climbed up and grabbed the baby with a pair of tongs. The king and queen turned to each other. The king gulped.
The princess is too light.
Yes, the queen said in horror. Her gravity is gone. The Light Princess. Chapter 3. What a nice day.
Why doesn't the princess have gravity?
The king paced back and forth.
My queen, this child can't be ours. Someone took our baby and gave us this light one instead.
Don't be silly, dear, the queen said. I think something else caused this problem.
What do you mean?
The king asked. We didn't watch Ellen carefully at the baptism, and... The queen cleared her throat. Someone who was not invited got too close to her.
Aha!
The king slapped his forehead.
I get it. My sister put a spell on her.
Exactly, the queen said sadly. Everyone did their best to watch the baby princess, but accidents kept happening. For example, one fine summer day, Nanny put her to sleep. She covered the princess with a blanket to hold her down. Later, the queen entered the room. She didn't see the sleeping baby. What a nice day, the queen said. I'll let in some fresh air. She opened a window and then hurried off. She didn't realize a magical fairy wind was blowing outside. It swirled around the window, waiting to do some mischief. As soon as the queen left, the fairy wind rushed in. It danced over to the bed and swept up Ellen. Then it blew back outside. The small baby floated on the breeze like a tiny flower seed. When Nanny returned, the baby was gone. Nanny tried to stay calm.
The Queen probably took her.
She thought. She ran to the Queen's room.
Your Majesty, do you have Princess Ellen?
No. The Queen went pale. Is she missing?
I'm afraid so,
Nanny said. The Queen yelled for help.
Help! Help!
A moment later, the palace was as busy as a beehive. Everyone buzzed about, searching for the missing baby.
Princess Ellen!
Finally, a shout rang out.
I found her!
A servant cried. Everyone ran out to the garden. The baby lay under a rose bush, sound asleep. A thick blanket of rose petals covered her. The King and Queen sobbed with relief.
Oh! Ellen, no!
The noise woke up Ellen, who laughed and laughed. She kicked her tiny feet, spraying rose petals everywhere. The Light Princess. Chapter 4. Mend Your Ways. After the fairy wind's mischief, Ellen was never left alone. Everyone held her tightly so she couldn't float away. She was tied to her bed and carriage. She was carried everywhere. Her poor parents couldn't stop worrying. One day, the king was counting his money.
My gold coins have weight,
He thought sadly.
yet my daughter weighs nothing at all.
A moment later, the king heard someone crying. It was the queen. The king hurried to her.
What's wrong, my queen?
It's our child, the queen said. Ellen is so light. What if we lose her again? She blew her nose.
It's a big worry.
The king said glumly.
And what will happen when Ellen gets married and has children? Our kingdom will be filled with floating babies.
I have an idea, the queen said slowly. The king smiled.
You always have good ideas, my queen. What is this one?
You could visit your sister, she said. The king coughed nervously.
Visit Lady Agnes?
Yes, tell her we're sorry. We didn't mean to forget her invitation, the queen said. And then you must beg her to remove the spell. Please, dear. The king sighed and patted his wife's shoulder.
Dry your tears. I'll go tomorrow.
The next morning, the king went to visit Lady Agnes. A servant brought tea. The king fumbled with his napkin.
I hope you're well, Agnes. I came to talk to you about something important.
Agnes narrowed her eyes.
Yes?
It's the spell.
The king said.
You were angry I forgot to invite you to the baptism. So you put a spell on Ellen. And now the princess is...
A spell?
Agnes laughed loudly.
How ridiculous! As usual, you're much too impatient, brother. Your silly daughter will grow out of her lightness someday. You just need to be patient and mend your ways.
Mend my ways?
The king said.
What do you mean?
Work on being a better person.
Agnes sneered.
I'll tell you where to start. Treat your older sister with more respect.
The Light Princess, Chapter 5. Hee hee! Time passed and Ellen grew up. She got used to keeping rocks in her pockets. This kept her from floating away. And her parents began to enjoy having a light princess. With Ellen, the palace always rang with laughter. Life was always fun. By the time Ellen was 17, her parents were uneasy again. Yes, Ellen delighted everyone with her laughter, but she laughed at everything, even things that were not funny. For instance, whenever the Queen cried, Ellen giggled.
Mama, you're squeezing water out of your cheeks again.
Whenever the King yelled, Ellen floated around him like a butterfly, grinning.
Make that mean face again, Papa. You look silly.
Then one day, something awkward happened. Ellen was crossing the lawn with two servants. They held her hands tightly. But when Ellen saw her father, she yanked one hand away.
Papa!
Ellen looked for rocks to put in her pockets. But all she saw was a big black toad. She grabbed it and started running. She held out her arms, ready to kiss her father. Suddenly, there was a puff of wind. The princess flew in another direction, into a young page's arms. Smack! The princess planted a kiss on one of the page's cheeks. On the other cheek, she slapped him with the huge black toad. The princess giggled.
I hope you like toads.
The king turned red as she shrieked with laughter.
This is so embarrassing!
He thought.
Something must be done!
The next morning, the king and queen sent for the princess. She had only a few small stones in her pockets, so it took her a while to sit down. The king cleared his throat.
Ellen, you know you're different from everyone.
No, I'm not.
Ellen laughed.
I have a nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth like everyone else.
Be serious, her mother said.
No, thank you. I like being silly.
Ellen laughed and laughed. The king looked at his wife.
Now what?
There's only one thing to do, she said. We must send for Cop and Hum, the kingdom's wisest philosophers. The Light Princess, Chapter 6. What is the cure? A servant led Cop and Hum into the throne room.
It's a big worry.
The king explained his daughter's condition.
It will be filled with
The two wise philosophers listened carefully.
Now tell us,
The king said.
what is the cure for our daughter's problem?
Cop spoke up first.
I know what's wrong. The princess's soul is in the wrong body.
The queen blinked in surprise. I don't understand,
Let me explain.
Cop said.
When babies are born, they must wait for their souls to arrive. This takes some time. And I think the wrong soul arrived in the princess's body.
What on earth are you talking about?
The king snapped.
Earth? No, Your Majesty. I'm talking about a different planet. I believe Ellen's soul came from the planet Mercury. But don't worry.
Pop said quickly.
There's a simple cure for this problem.
Phew!
The king smiled.
Finally, some good news.
Please tell us, the queen begged him. How can we cure her?
You must teach her all about our planet.
Cop said.
She must learn about our animals and plants.
He tapped his chin.
And of course, someone must also teach her about art and literature. It will take time, but...
No, no, no!
Hum roared.
That's completely wrong! It's my turn now. And I know exactly what's wrong with the princess. There's a problem with her body. In her blood.
Her blood? The queen said.
Yes.
Hum nodded.
Her blood is flowing through her body in the wrong direction. That's why she lacks gravity. I don't know what caused it. To cure her, you must first put her in a warm bath. Then you'll need air pumps and... Enough!
The king cried.
You may be wise philosophers, but your ideas are ridiculous!
The queen nodded. Why don't you two stay at the palace for a few days? Watch the princess closely, then tell us what you think. And so the two philosophers moved into the palace. Now, reader, what did Ellen do when the philosophers began watching her? Why, she laughed at them, of course. The Light Princess, Chapter 7, She Can't Fall. Cop and Hum weren't the only ones looking for a cure. The palace servants loved the light-hearted princess. She made them laugh and feel happy.
I know what will help her.
A servant told Nanny.
Falling in love with a handsome prince.
Nanny shook her head.
Don't you remember? The princess has no gravity. She can't fall into anything.
Actually, reader, the princess was already in love. But it wasn't with a prince. It was with the palace's lake. It started when Ellen accidentally fell in the water. The family was boating on the lake. Ellen suddenly spotted a friend's boat across the lake.
Papa, I want to go on Mary's boat. Can you help me?
Of course!
The king picked her up. He carried her to the side of the boat when, boof! He tripped, and Ellen splashed into the water.
She'll drown!
The king cried.
She can't swim! I'll save her, Your Majesty!
A servant dived into the water. But when the servant came back up, his arms were empty. A second later, the princess popped up on the other side of the lake.
Here I am!
She yelled, laughing. The servant tried to get her, but she swam away. For hours, she swam around the lake like a swan. In the water, gravity didn't matter. For the first time, Ellen felt truly free to move on her own. After this event, all Ellen wanted to do was swim. In the summer, she swam all day long. In the winter, servants broke the ice for her. At night, she stared out her bedroom window, missing the lake. The philosophers watched Ellen closely. Soon, they both had the same thought.
That's it!
Cop shouted.
Yes!
Hum cried. They rushed to tell the king and queen.
Your Majesties, we have found a cure for the princess!
Cop said.
A wonderful cure! It's water!
Water?
The king frowned.
She swims all the time. Water hasn't cured her yet.
No,
Cop said impatiently.
she needs water from inside herself. The water must come from...
Tears.
Hum said.
We must make Ellen cry.
The Light Princess, Chapter 8, A More Interesting Princess. The king drummed his fingers on his throne, looking at his wife.
How can we make Ellen cry?
It's impossible, the queen sighed. Ugh. All she does is laugh. But the queen soon came up with another idea. The next day, a beggar arrived at the palace. His clothes were rags. His face was streaked with dirt. A servant led Ellen into the room.
Yes, Papa?
Ellen said. The king introduced the beggar.
This man has had a hard life. He would like to tell you some stories.
The king turned to the beggar.
Please, tell us your saddest tales.
For the next hour, the beggar told Ellen about being poor.
Every night I go to bed hungry. I sleep in the cold. Some days I eat only a few crumbs.
Tears fell from the queen's eyes. How sad! She glanced at her daughter. Ellen was looking down. A sound was bubbling up from her chest. The queen's face lit up. My idea is working, she thought. The princess is sobbing. But the sound bursting from Ellen was not a sob. It was a giggle. A second later, the princess was screaming with laughter. The king and queen groaned as a servant took her away.
What will we do?
The king asked. The next day, the desperate parents tried something else. They marched upstairs to the princess's bedroom. Then they yelled at her in their loudest, meanest voices.
Listen to me right now, young lady.
You were very rude to the beggar! The princess's lip quivered, and then she burst into laughter. Now, around this time, a handsome prince was looking for a wife. The prince was brave and kind, and many women loved him. Yet the prince didn't love any of them back.
I will travel to another kingdom.
He decided at last.
Perhaps I can find the right princess there. I want a wife who makes me laugh and feel happy.
One afternoon, he was riding along a lake.
What a lovely lake.
The prince thought. Someone shrieked. The prince jumped off his horse and ran to the water's edge. In the center of the lake, a woman was drowning. The Light Princess, Chapter 9. So much fun.
I'll save you!
The prince cried, diving into the water. He swam as fast as he could to the drowning woman. He grabbed her and swam back to shore.
Whew!
The prince gently placed her on the bank of the lake. But to his shock, she flew up into the air.
You naughty man!
She yelled down at him.
Naughty?
The prince said.
You were crying for help!
I wasn't crying.
The princess said.
I was laughing.
Ellen managed to grab some pine cones from a fir tree.
Wait till Papa hears about this. Because of you, I almost floated away.
She dropped down to the ground and stomped over to the prince.
Please don't tell him.
The prince said.
You seem fine.
Why did you pull me out of the water?
Ellen asked.
I thought you were drowning.
The prince said. She frowned at him.
I might lack gravity, but it seems you lack something too. Brains.
It's her!
The prince thought. People told stories about a light princess with no gravity. This must be the woman. The princess stamped her foot.
I want to go back in the water. You must put me there at once.
The prince stared into her blue eyes.
She's beautiful.
He thought.
Did you hear me?
The princess asked.
I need you to put me back in the water.
At last, the prince understood. Without gravity, the princess could not put herself back in the water. He took her hand. They walked to another part of the lake.
How should I put you in the water?
He asked.
You pulled me out.
She said.
Please figure out how to put me back.
Very well.
The prince led her onto a nearby rock. Then he held her tightly and leaped. Ellen burst out laughing.
I never fell into the water like that before. That was so much fun.
The prince laughed too.
I fell into the water with the most perfect creature ever!
And away the two of them went, swimming and splashing and laughing together. The Light Princess, Chapter 10. A Mermaid and Merman. Ellen and the prince swam for hours. They dived and floated. They played games underwater. Then the moon began to rise and they heard voices. Lights shined through the woods.
The servants are coming for me.
Ellen whispered.
Too bad, because this is delightful.
The prince nodded.
Swimming with you makes me so happy. Can we meet again?
Perhaps,
She looked away.
but it's not proper to meet alone. We must keep our meetings a secret.
Of course.
The prince said. He slipped out of the lake and disappeared into the dark woods. Early the next morning, the prince returned to the lake. The princess was already swimming. The prince longed to join her, but her parents were with her. They were in a beautiful boat, drifting on the lake.
You must wait.
He reminded himself, thinking of their secret. Finally, by late afternoon, Ellen was alone at the lake. The prince found a tall rock and climbed up. He began to sing.
My fair lady, with white skin and golden hair,
Ellen swam over, floating below him.
in your eyes, banish the night with your eyes.
You have a lovely voice.
He blushed.
Thank you. Would you like to fall into the water with me again?
Yes.
Her blue eyes twinkled.
You must pull me up there first.
The prince took off his scarf and belt and tied them together. Then he let them down like a rope. She grabbed on, and he pulled her up to the rock. They held hands and leaped into the water together. Ellen laughed with delight.
What fun!
Day after day, the pair met. They swam in the lake and talked about everything. The prince was falling in love. Ellen was beautiful, and she made him so happy. He tried to share his feelings with her, but she just laughed at him.
I'm serious, Ellen.
He said. She laughed louder and swam away. The prince sighed and swam after her. As time went on, the prince saw that Ellen was always light-hearted. He realized something else too. She was happiest in the water.
Someday I will marry her.
He thought.
But we will have to turn into a mermaid and a merman.
The Light Princess. Chapter 11. Drain the Lake Dry. Lady Agnes watched Ellen grow up. The witch was proud of her gravity spell.
The king and queen worry about Ellen all the time.
She thought happily.
Their daughter will be light and silly forever.
Then one day at the lake, Agnes saw Ellen swimming. The princess dived and floated, laughing with delight. Agnes's eyes flashed blue.
I should have thought of the water. It's the one place where the princess is free.
Back at home, the angry witch paced back and forth.
I'll cast a new spell, a better one,
She thought.
Ellen will lose her beloved lake, and the kingdom will lose all its water.
Agnes hurried to a chest for some dried seaweed. She threw it into a tub of water with powder. Chanting a spell, she began to stir. Soon a creature rose from the tub, hissing. It was a water dragon with shimmering scales.
Perfect!
The witch put it on her shoulders.
Now I must get the keys to all the cellars.
Agnes grabbed a huge key ring with 100 keys. Then she went to a cellar door and unlocked it. She went down a few steps and came to another door. She unlocked that one, climbing down more steps to another door. She kept doing this until 100 doors were unlocked. At the bottom of all the steps was a huge cave. Its ceiling was held up by rock pillars. Gazing at the ceiling, the witch cackled. Above it was the bottom of the lake. Agnes lifted the dragon, who stretched upward. It circled its head, looking for something on the ceiling. Suddenly, it darted toward a stone.
You found it,
The witch said.
Drain the lake dry, my beauty.
The dragon latched onto the stone tightly. Agnes let go and left the dragon hanging. As the creature worked the spell, the witch sat down. She began to knit with her black cat lying beside her.
Settle in, kitty. We'll wait here until the dragon is done.
The Light Princess. Chapter 12. Something's wrong with the lake. Now, reader, the princess loved the lake with all her heart. She knew where to find its best diving spots. She knew where its tallest bank sat. She knew where all its fish and wild creatures lived. So, of course, Ellen knew at once that the lake was changing. She first noticed it while swimming with the prince. She shot to the surface and looked around.
Something's wrong with the lake.
The prince popped up nearby.
It looks fine to me.
No, the lake is different.
She took off, swimming toward a deeper part of the lake. He swam after her, wondering if she was sick.
Ellen, are you okay?
Ellen didn't reply or look back. Instead, she darted from place to place, checking different spots around the lake. The next day when they met, she was even more upset.
The banks are too dry. The grass and plants are dying.
She pointed to rocks baking in the sun.
Look! Those rocks are usually under the water.
The confused prince tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away.
This is terrible!
She cried.
The lake is losing its water!
Agnes stayed in the cellar for 7 days and 7 nights. Finally, the water dragon dropped onto the floor. It quickly dried up and turned back to seaweed. The witch grabbed the seaweed and looked up. Water was beginning to drip from the stone.
The spell worked!
She cried. Soon lake water would be rushing into her cellars. She had to get back upstairs, fast. The next day, Agnes checked the lake. Most of its water was gone, but here and there were a few shallow pools. Agnes frowned.
The spell is taking too long!
That night, Agnes went back to the lake. She walked all around, sprinkling her potion everywhere. She even tossed some into the air at the princess's window. An instant later, the kingdom's rivers and brooks stopped flowing. Water no longer rushed down its mountains. Fountains and wells went dry. Even babies' tears dried up. At the lake, the last bit of water was finally gone. The Light Princess, Chapter 13, Like a Cork? The princess closed her bedroom curtains. She couldn't bear to look at the lake anymore. All that was left was mud and rocks. In the brown muck, eels crawled around and fishes flopped. At first, Ellen's parents thought she might cry. But no tears flowed. Instead, the princess locked herself away. Under the witch's spell, she forgot about the prince. She forgot about everyone, even her parents. The palace no longer rang with the sound of her laughter. For a while, the prince kept going to the lake. Finally, he realized something.
Ellen is never coming back.
He thought.
I must find out if she's okay.
The prince dressed like a servant. Then he went to the palace, pretending to work there. While he shined boots, he asked other servants about Ellen. They all said the same thing.
The princess is dying.
His heart sunk. He had to save her. But how?
I'll go away to think of a plan.
He decided. The king and queen didn't know what to do either. As usual, the king was growing impatient. Let's send for Cop and Hum, the queen said. Perhaps they can explain why the lake went dry. Then we can fix it. Cop and Hum studied the lake bed. They discussed the dry rivers and fountains and babies' tears. But they couldn't figure out the cause of the problem. One afternoon, a boy came to see the queen and king. He was carrying a golden plate.
I found this in the muddy lake bed, Your Majesties. I think it has a clue about the lake.
What?
The king took the plate. It was covered with writing.
There's a long poem,
He said.
It tells of a magical way to fill the lake!
How? The queen cried.
There's a hole in the lake bed.
The king explained.
A human must climb into that hole to plug it up.
Like a cork? The queen asked.
Yes!
The king said.
This cork, person, must give his life.
He looked at his wife sadly.
Where will we find a brave hero like that?
The Light Princess. Chapter 14. Who will volunteer? The Queen wanted the king to make a proclamation. So he told everyone in the kingdom about the gold plate.
A human must climb into that hole to plug it up. We need a brave hero to save the princess,
He said,
Who will volunteer?
but no one stepped forward. As time went on, the princess grew sicker. At last, the prince returned. When he heard the proclamation, his heart leaped.
Finally! Something I can do!
He thought,
I'll lose my life. But without the princess, I have no life. And I will see her one last time before I die.
the prince dressed like a servant again. Then he hurried to the palace. The king stared at the handsome servant before him.
Tell me what you want, young man.
I want to be the Cork.
The prince said. The king gasped.
What? You'll be the hero?
Yes, I will give my life to return water to the lake.
The prince said.
That's wonderful!
The king said.
Would you like to go and see your parents first?
No,
The prince said.
but I do have one condition.
Anything?
The king said.
I'll climb into the hole.
The prince began.
Then, by magic, water will return to the lake. When it reaches my head, I will drown.
The king looked down.
I'm afraid so, yes.
It will be a long wait.
The prince went on.
Yes.
The king bit his lip.
Waiting is hard, but with you, as Cork, the lake will never leak again.
I want the princess to sit with me.
The prince went on.
She can feed me. She can look at me now and then to comfort me. When the water reaches my eyes, she may go.
I will grant your condition.
The king said.
Now go and prepare yourself. My guards will search for the hole.
It took the guards a long time to find the hole. But they finally found it in the center of the lake bed. It was in the middle of a large stone. The guards hurried back to tell the king. It was time to save the lake and the princess. The Light Princess. Chapter 15. This is very kind of you.
We need a brave hero to save the...
Ellen's parents told her the news. A man, a brave hero, was willing to die for her. She jumped off her bed in joy.
Carry me
Servants carried Ellen to the middle of the lake bed. A small boat was waiting there in the mud. It was filled with food and other supplies. The prince arrived, waving.
Here I am!
Still under the witch's spell, Ellen blinked.
I know him.
She thought. The prince climbed into the hole. Water magically began flowing over the stone.
It's working!
He thought.
The lake is filling up again!
Ellen told the others to leave. She lay in the boat with her eyes shut.
This is very kind of you.
She said.
You made me happy.
The prince said.
We laughed all the time.
Time went by, and waves began flowing over the stone. As the water rose, the boat began to float. The princess fell asleep.
Ellen!
The prince was hurt.
Your father promised that you would comfort me.
She yawned.
I'm too sleepy.
The prince sighed.
Sleep then, darling. Don't worry about me.
You are very kind.
She said.
Thank you. I think I will go back to sleep.
Can you give me some food first?
The prince asked. Reaching for the food, she looked at him for the first time.
You don't look very well.
I'm fine.
He said.
I just need to eat.
The princess fed him. Soon the sun went down, and the moon rose over the lake. By now, waters were gushing around the prince's waist.
There's plenty of water now.
Ellen said.
Let's go swimming.
The prince shook his head.
I'm afraid I've had my last swim.
He said sadly. Ellen laughed.
Silly me. I forgot.
The water kept rising, reaching his neck. The prince felt weak. He knew the end was near.
Will you kiss me, princess?
He asked.
Then I can die happy.
Of course.
As she leaned forward, the princess stared at the man's face. And finally it struck her. This was her prince, and he was dying. The Light Princess, Chapter 16. Are you crying for me? The princess jumped into the lake. Underwater, she grabbed the prince's shoulders and tugged, but she couldn't move him. She came up for air and almost screamed. The water was up to the prince's eyes. Ellen tilted his head back. His nose and mouth were above the surface now.
But he's not breathing.
She thought in a panic.
What should I do?
Suddenly, love and water brought back all her strength. She dived in again and pulled with her whole might. Finally, an arm came out of the hole. The rest of his body quickly followed. Reader, no one knows how the princess got him into the boat. But somehow she did this. Then she rowed the boat to shore as fast as she could. Using all her strength again, she pulled the prince onto land. His cheeks were pale and his eyes were closed.
I'm too late,
She thought.
he's dead!
Ellen's chest felt tight. She let out a strange sound and her eyes filled with tears. As she cried for the first time ever, raindrops began to fall. And it wasn't ordinary rain. It was the colors of rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. The rain grew stronger. Soon water flowed down mountains like liquid gold. Brooks and rivers streamed again. Baby's eyes filled with tiny tears. The water in the lake rose higher and higher. So did the water in Agnes's cellars. Crash! A powerful river suddenly burst through the cellar's doors and passages.
Oh no!
Agnes screamed. The churning floodwater swept her away. The princess continued to cry. She cried so hard, she didn't see the prince open his eyes.
Are you crying for me?
He asked.
You're alive!
The princess leaped up, forgetting to grab rocks. But she didn't float away. Instead, she tumbled back down onto the ground.
You fell!
The prince was amazed.
That means you have gravity!
Everyone in the kingdom rejoiced. Soon afterward, Ellen and the prince got married. They had many children who all had gravity. Together they laughed and cried and lived happily ever after.